Qatar has agreed to, quote, countering financing of ISIL and other violent extremists, repudiating their hateful ideology, ending impunity, and bringing perpetrators to justice, among other points. And my colleague David Weinberg has issued 2 reports on Qatar and their terror financing, their unwillingness to bring perpetrators to justice, and their support for violent extremism. Is, again, that's a commitment. I know there have been, I think, 7 congressional letters that have raised concerns about Qatar's record on terror financing from 2013 to 2016. I understand that Qatar has, again, promised in Riyadh and in joining other GCC countries in redoubling these efforts. So there's an explicit promise that's been made by Qatar. With this new legislation, I guess you'll be holding up that explicit promise against what's actually happening on the ground in considering sanctions against Qatar.
Right. Rather than send demarches, rather than send protests over, I think the most direct way to approach it is legislatively, with sanctions legislation. And one of the things, let me go off topic for a minute just to express my appreciation to you on a subject. My feeling was the same way about Iran. And when Eliot Engel and I sat down after I became chairman of the committee and discussed what we could actually do to change Iran's behavior, our collective judgment, and we had some 30 hearings on this, was that we should give the Ayatollah a choice between economic collapse or real compromise on his nuclear program. And I guess the surprise for me, when we wrote the legislation, and we had a lot of, we used the conceptual support, conceptual underpinning of this from Treasury, work over at Treasury. But frankly, your organization was very helpful as well as we tightened that bill up. And the administration opposed it. We did not know at the time that they were doing their own backdoor negotiations with the Ayatollah. The argument I made was that the negotiations should be on behalf of the people of Iran, not with the Ayatollah. The focus should be on the Iranian people who had had an election stolen from them. But we had a conflict of vision. So we bring the bill up in committee, and despite the administration's opposition, after making our case, and with the help from you, we passed that unanimously. We took it to the floor, and the administration redoubled their effort. We passed it off the floor of the House with a vote of 400 to 20. That was the collective judgment of this institution when they heard the arguments and came to the conclusion, give the Ayatollah that choice, economic collapse or real compromise on his nuclear program. Took it to the Senate. We had 60 supporters in the Senate. We could not get to 2/3. But that's the kind of approach and leverage that we need. I never understood the inability of the former administration to understand that even if they wanted to do a deal, we needed to have some backstop that would be effective. But I do know what was effective in prior situations. I won't get into North Korea, but only once in 2006 did we let Stuart Levy, Undersecretary of the Treasury, temporarily move against them when they were counterfeiting $100 US bills. And the results of that was to shut down the hard currency for their missile program. It shut down the missile program. They didn't have the hard currency for their nuclear program. The dictator did not have the money to pay his generals, as one of the high-ranking North Korean defectors told us. That's not a good position for a dictator to be in. But the Department of State put so much pressure on Treasury, they forced Treasury's hand to lift those sanctions. Just once, I'd like to make the point that yes, sanctions can work And I talked to a former member of the government in South Africa who told me we would have lasted about 10 days after the United States put economic sanctions against us. And at the end, we turned over the nuclear weapon that we had created to the international community. You know, we let Mandela out of jail and we agreed to end apartheid. Yes, when we're united, sanctions can work. And so, you know, we will try the entreaties, we will try the letters and, you know, try to hold people to their commitments. But at the end of the day, to really hold people to account, they need to feel the consequences. And when human lives are at stake, and not just our national security, but, you know, the safety of our allies, their security is at stake, there comes a time when you have to move forward decisively. And that's why I'll be proud to move Brian Mast and my legislation later this week.